This is The Right Approach. I'm JW Judge, and with me, as always, is my co-host Barbara Hinsky. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft and business of writing as we explore a new topic every week. Our guest today is Jessie Kwak. She is a science fiction author. Within the last year, she has released her book From Big Idea to Book, Create a Writing Practice That Brings You Joy. And her own next big idea appears to be the author Alchemy Summit, which she's putting together for February 2024 in Portland, Oregon. So we have plenty to talk about today. Jessie, welcome to The Right Approach.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
All right, let's start with conferences generally, because I know that a lot of authors like me are introverts, and the idea of going to conferences and having to do small talk is like just about enough to give you hives. But I am a big believer in the value that conferences can bring. And just last week was in a conference in Indianapolis and have a story that I'll share here about that. But tell me, and you're setting up the Author Alchemy Summit. Tell me a little bit about that and why and how conferences can bring value to authors.
Yeah, I think your point about authors often being introverts, that is such a huge point because I'm very much an introvert. I'm the quiet person that likes to spend all of my time in my office and never leave. But I think the community that you can build with other writers is such a huge part of having a career that you don't burn out as quickly. I mean, because we're such introverts, we tend to be very, I'll just stay here and do my own thing. But that community can really be a source of energy and creativity. And of course, professional opportunities. I mean, you might meet people who you might collaborate with, or you might meet editors that you might work with, or, all sorts of people that you'll meet at these conferences. So when I started going to conferences originally, I was like, okay, I'm just going to be the person in the corner and I might talk to one or two people. But I found, especially at writers' conferences, because everyone tends to be the quiet person in the corner, they are a very welcoming place for those quiet people. And there are a lot of people who will just be like, oh, hi, you in the corner. I haven't spoken to you yet. Come sit at our table. People are very welcoming. And that's, of course, definitely what I'm trying to do with the Author Alchemy Summit. It's small. It's only going to be about 150 people, so you won't get lost in the crowd. But yeah, I think I've so much joy. I've gotten so much joy from conferences over the years. And it is in tension with my introverted side, but it's so worth it.
I think you make a good point. I think the writer community is very collaborative and very supportive of each other. We're not a competitive group. And that's, Jeremy and I are both lawyers. Are you also a lawyer?
No.
No, okay. Well, we are. So, we're used to swimming in the pond of people that just are competitive by nature. So it is very refreshing to be in this group of people, writers, that support each other. And so I think summits and all these things like you're doing are very valuable for us. They're supportive.
Mm-hmm.
The size of your conference, I think, for me, I've found is ideal. I haven't been to any writing conferences yet, but I've been to lots of conferences for authors in my commercial litigation practice or for lawyers. I'm not sure what I said, but for lawyers. And what I've found is I would go to these mega conferences that have 1,000 people and just become a wallflower because there's just so much going on. It's nearly impossible to find anybody, even if you know people who are there. And I was out of my comfort zone and couldn't find a comfortable place. But over the last, few years, I guess, really starting in 2019, And then obviously we had a lull where there weren't any conferences for a while, but they seem to be back on now. I've been to a couple since. Conferences that have 75, 100, 150 people, where you can easily see everybody in the room
Mhm.
and identify, for me, I've gone to these and known at least a couple of people, sometimes half the people who were there. And I don't have to have that dreaded figuring out something to talk about, in part because you all have this common bond. I mean, for us, like I just went to this conference in Indianapolis, and we were all there for this very niche practice area that's kind of grim. Um, and it's a shame that it exists, but and you just have this thing to talk about with other people, and the same thing with writers. And so here's my travel story. Last Sunday, um, I flew from Birmingham, where I live, to Atlanta and was going to catch a connecting flight from Atlanta to Indianapolis. As soon as I landed in Atlanta, I got a text from the airline saying, "Hey, we've canceled your connecting flight." I was like, "Okay, well, that's
Okay.
great." And so I go, and then a few minutes later, I get a text saying, "We have booked you another flight for tomorrow." And this was Sunday morning. They were going to fly me out like 36 hours later, which wasn't going to work. So I went to the help desk, and the they got me sorted out, got me connected to Chicago, and from Chicago they were going to get me on a different airline over to Indianapolis, and I would eventually get in. And I did. I got into Indianapolis at like 11 o'clock that night,
Oh my.
and my bag did not arrive with me. Um, and so I had a client meeting the next day. And I had really nice clothes to wear in my bag, but not on my person. And so that morning, I walked around all of downtown Indianapolis looking for anywhere to buy anything kind of nice. And the only store was a TJ Maxx. Um,
My.
and the only, like, they had a button-up shirt that was not offensive to my eyes, but only one. Um, and so, I show up to this client meeting with my clients and all these other lawyers who were there, and I'm in jeans um and just like a casual shirt. But it was it was fine. They had everybody go around and do like introductions because it was a fairly small group. And so, I got to have my funny little story that I told with my introduction about why I'm kind of not dressed like the rest of you. And it was a lead in to conversations for the rest of the conference.
Mhm.
And so it took out that small talk, figuring out something other than the weather to get a conversation started, because everybody immediately could identify me and knew there was a story to go with it. But so that's the long way of saying not every conference is going to be for you. There's these huge conferences with hundreds and thousands of people, and that may not be for you. It may be a smaller conference that is more niche and more particularized, that better fits your personality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your point about the close in the story being an entry point to conversation. I think one of the things that I notice at writers' conferences, there's a very natural entry point, which is, what do you write? Tell me about your books. But there are so many fun other entry points. And so my day job is as a freelance copywriter, and I've been doing that for over a decade now. And part of that is you have to go to networking events and you have to try to, meet new clients that way. So I've really exercised my introvert over the last decade of networking events. Um, and yeah, just kind of learning how to enjoy that and learning how to figure out that small talk and those little entry points. So you actually inspired me. I wrote down a little note for I'll put out a newsletter as I'm putting together, as we get closer to the conference. I will definitely be sending out some tips to introverts, to the people that are on the list.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So, all right, tying this in with your day job and the you have to do for that, and also for your writing career. How did you go about figuring out a way to do networking in a way that's sustainable for your long-term career and doesn't burn you out?
I have really kind of approached it as meeting friends, trying to find friends as opposed to like I need to go in and I need to talk to 10 different people and get their business cards and have constant, um, like pinging people on LinkedIn and all of that stuff just feels really inauthentic to me. And so in my early career, I was trying to be a little bit more mercenary about like, okay, I need to make 8 contacts every day and like all of this stuff. But eventually I realized that the value that I was actually getting out of it was from meeting people who I liked instead of meeting people that I felt like I had to keep in contact with. So I remember one of the very first times that clicked for me was at a networking event when we're in Portland, Oregon, and we moved here about the same time I was starting my freelance career. So I kind of had to jump in with no friends and no contacts. And I met this woman who just seemed cool, and she didn't have any professional utility to me. She wasn't hiring freelancers. But she seemed neat. So we grabbed a cup of coffee, and about 6 months later, she got hired into a role where she did need a freelancer, and she hired me. And I was like, oh, I didn't keep in touch with her because she was useful. I kept in touch with her because she seemed nice. And we hit it off, and we had a couple beers, and went out for dinner a couple times. And then when she needed somebody, she thought of me. And that's kind of been I guess the sustainable approach to networking for me is it's if you're really going after it, like, okay, I have to meet an agent or an editor, or I have to meet, this person that's really going to give me the next step on my career, then it's exhausting and overwhelming. But if you go in and you're like, I'm looking for new friends. Who seems interesting? Oh, you like the same board games I do. Oh, you write the same genre I do. And I don't know if you said that you hadn't gone to many writer conferences, but I've been to a lot of like more traditionally published conferences, and then lately more indie conferences. And a lot of the traditional ones, there is that more, okay, I got to meet the editor, I got to meet the agent. You're looking over your shoulder to be like, okay, has the important person walked in the room? And I just see that in people's eyes. They're just so stressed out. Like, I'm walking in here like a fish hoping to meet the shark that will help my career instead of eat me. But the indie conferences, I mean, you're all there for the same thing, which is to meet each other, which is a much more relaxed environment, I've noticed.
It's so hard. That's part of this author journey, author curve, because essentially whether you're traditionally or independently published, we're all entrepreneurs, and you feel like every action you take is make or break. What a horrible social media, all of that. It's exhausting. And then, like you say, going in and thinking, okay, I have to meet, there's going to be the one editor, the one agent, the one whoever. And if I don't source this, I don't get to progress in my career. And it's crazy making. So I love your approach, because you can't be your most productive when you're under, or your most engaging or whatever, when you're under that pressure. It's
and I think I guess to throw another analogy in there, it's really like planting seeds. And that is something that I've learned over my decade of freelancing, is that, any networking event I go to, I'm not going to walk away with a job, right? But I might get an email from somebody 2 years down the line that said, oh, hey, my colleague met you at this event 2 years ago, and now we both work for a different company. And, so it's just, you're going out there, you're planting seeds, you're having fun. If you're having fun, other people are having fun, and they're remembering you as a fun person. So just relax and remember that it's about planting seeds and making friends, and not about this high stakes. I have to meet the one person.
Yeah. One of the business axioms, I guess, that I've always held on to, and that we've been talking around here, is that people do business with people that they know, like, and trust.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
those first two parts of knowing you and liking you, if you're so stressed out, like, you can't enjoy yourself and other people can't enjoy being with you and aren't going to get the opportunity to know you, and determine whether they like you and eventually whether they trust you months or even years down the road. So, um, in staying with this theme of sustainability, and we've been talking about marketing and branding, but for those of us who are writers, most of us have ideas to do this for a really long time and
Mhm.
need to not kill ourselves trying to do too much or doing writing and authorship in a way that isn't sustainable. So how do you approach having a sustainable author business? Because you're obviously doing your other business as well. And I think a lot of us are doing that. And so there's a lot to juggle. And that isn't even mentioning personal and family stuff and all that. So, um, in light of all of that, how do you approach having a sustainable author career?
Yeah. I think partly having my other job is part of how I approach having a sustainable author career. Elizabeth Gilbert in her book Big Magic said something about, like, not putting so much pressure on your art to make the money. And I really I I struggle with that a lot because I do want my books, my fiction books, to be supporting me and be bestsellers. And I meet people who are making six figures off their sci-fi, and I'm just like, oh, I want that too. But I also want to write the books I want to write, and maybe they're not as quite as sellable. And I'm working towards writing more sellable books, and I'm learning my craft. But I don't. If I want to write, if I want to make a bunch of money writing things that I might not care about, I can write white papers for Intel
Mm,
and
yeah.
make the same amount of money or more. So I keep reminding myself that, like, okay,
Mhm.
the day job stuff is still actually things that I am really passionate about. I do a lot of ghostwriting for business books for, kind of coaches and consultants and people with like really cool big ideas. So it's stuff that I love, but it helps me get kind of the money and the flexibility where I don't have to stress so much about, is this book going to sell? Is this the one that's going to make a bunch of money and help support me for the next year? So I think that is key. Like, I mean, depending on your personality, some people can go all in and be like, all right, I'm just going to figure out how to make this fiction sell. Some people might take a little longer path. And if that's you, then don't burn yourself out putting all of this pressure on your fiction or on your author books, your nonfiction, if that's what you happen to write. But
Mhm.
instead, try to figure out what is a way that you can still make money in a way that is supporting your art until your art kind of gains that momentum and can support you back. So that's been a big part of it. And that's kind of why I started freelancing, is because I knew working full-time at a day job writing for me, that didn't leave any brain space at the end of the day for writing. But I knew if I could figure out a freelance schedule where I could be a little bit more flexible and still make money doing the thing that I loved and was good at, but not have to do it on a 9 to 5 schedule, then I would have more time for the fiction.
You know what? That is such helpful advice to put out there. I think, in my space, I'm a women's fiction author primarily. And so the big buzzword is rapid release. And some of these
Mhm.
gals are are releasing one a month. No, that is absolutely insane. And all these people, and good on them, but figuring out how to write 5 to 10,000 words a day and all that. No, thank you. That is just crazy making, and all the emphasis on right to market. Well, that's the sure way to put cold water on your creativity. So I think this
Mhm.
is such a vast industry. There are so many paths to success, and it is a real mistake to believe there is only one way, and it's only whatever is, by the time anybody like us hears about this is a path to success, the metrics have changed. You've lost that wave anyway. So I think that's really smart. You're still writing, you're still honing your craft. And I'm sure your day job as a ghostwriter is helping improve your skills for your fiction writing. So it's just a huge win-win.
Yeah, and I really think that the right to market and rapid release, there are some people that seem to legitimately be thriving on that as writers. And I'm very happy for them and jealous. But that's not me, and that's not, I think, most people. And so I think if you're listening to this and this is, if that sounds exhausting to you, it's okay to find a different path. There's a lot of different paths, like you said.
Yeah.
Well, going back to writing what you enjoy, I think that's so important. And also I want to make sure to say that your covers of your science fiction books are really just rad, and I like them.
Thank you.
But for me, as much as I want my writing to be commercially successful, and I absolutely do, and I'm totally okay with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I want people to read what I write. I also, like you, want to write the things that I enjoy writing, and don't want to put myself in a situation to spend, I mean, for me, with my work and family schedule, it's going to take me 5 or 6 months to write a book. And I don't want to spend that 5 or 6 months writing characters and telling a story that I'm not enjoying telling. And so if I knowingly choose to write something that not as many people are going to be drawn to, I'm okay with that if I'm enjoying it. And hopefully I will compile enough books where there will be enough people who find what I write and enjoy it, that it will create its own audience over time. But I think that that's such an important part, that people have this idea that writing is supposed to be this miserable process, and you're not actually supposed to enjoy writing. And I think that's just such a fallacy that is not helpful. I mean, I love it. I love this storytelling and making up things that don't otherwise exist, and otherwise would not exist in the world if I weren't the one to make it up. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, but these characters and me telling it in the way that is from my own experiences is going to be different than anybody else who would tell that story. And I've only been writing fiction for 3 years now, but have thoroughly enjoyed that so much more than any of the nonfiction stuff that I've ever written.
I think that joy is such a key part that you're right. I think a lot of people miss. And you do. I mean, the idea of like the writer crankily hunched over the keyboard, like throwing away paper. Like, I mean, that's a part of it too, right? I mean, we can't.
Sure.
There's a fair amount of frustration, but I think for the vast majority of writers, you got into it because you liked it and you enjoy telling the stories. And I think for a lot of us, even if we didn't make any money on it whatsoever, we'd continue doing it just because we enjoy the process. And once you start adding these different expectations on top of that process, like this book needs to sell well, this book needs to meet the right readers, this book needs to be to market, then that can start sucking the joy out of it. This book needs to land an agent. I have so many friends who I can see that frustration fighting with the joy. I want to keep writing this book, but I feel so stressed about it because I'm not sure what's going to happen with it. And I mean, I don't have an answer for those, figuring out how to deal with those expectations. But I think in the end, what we do as writers is we spend hours and hours and hours writing. And so if you're not having fun with that part, then you got to change something, because that's most of what you're doing with your life.
Sometimes those just projects of your heart have an unexpected success. in January of 2021, in 3 weeks, I wrote a novella called Paws and Pastries. Happy little book. I was facing eye surgery on January 21st, so I was really nervous about that. And COVID was swirling, and we had political upheaval and, all that mess. So I went to my happy place, banged out this little 30,000 word novella, posted it. That was the book that landed me on the USA Today bestseller list. So you just never know. And if I had been going by any of the metrics of what I should be doing by the marketing gurus, it would not have been Paws and Pastries.
Mm-hmm.
Which actually had a kind of a Christmas overlay in January, for crying out loud. But there you go. So yeah, I think going with your heart and what drives you in a fulfilling way is what's going to lead to your success as well.
Yeah, I love that story.
Yeah.
So as we go to the home stretch of this conversation, I want to go back to the Author Alchemy Summit and tell us about who it's for and what is the theme of this particular conference.
Yeah, so the theme is the kind of connecting directly with your readers. And so from everything from the speakers to the breakout sessions, it's all going to be around, from marketing and sales channels to like building an authentic author persona. I think, the idea of writing from your heart in a way that connects to your readers' hearts, like that will be a big core part of that. Building a sustainable author career that is built on, this community and also a community of your fellow authors, and then also your readers, like that's going to be a big part of it. So as I said, it's going to be pretty small, so very much for people who are looking for a more intimate conference experience. And then I'm not meaning for it to be either hardcore indie or hardcore traditional. It will be more geared towards indie writers because that's who I am, and that's who a lot of my colleagues tend to be. But it's really about what are the tools that we can all use, no matter how you're published.
Yeah.
And tell us again when it is and where it is. Give us all those good deets.
Oh, right. Yeah, so it'll be in Portland, Oregon in February 2024. I believe the dates are the 22nd through the 25th. It's at this really rad, like I figured if I'm bringing people to Portland, I want to give them like the Portland experience. So it's at this super rad hotel called the Jupiter Hotel, which is just kind of outside of downtown in a really artsy, fun neighborhood with a lot of breweries and coffee shops and all that good stuff. Yeah, and for all the introverts, we're going to have quiet spaces where you can go write. There's going to be mixers, so you may show up not knowing anybody, but you'll know people pretty quick. And with all the awesome social media stuff we have now, being able to have Facebook groups and Slack channels and things where you can kind of connect ahead of time. So when you show up, you'll be like, oh, I saw that person, or I've interacted with that person. So the idea is not only to come with and like educate yourself about writing and sustainability and marketing and all the good stuff that's happening, but really like the core idea is for you to leave with a community of people and colleagues and potential business partners and all sorts of contacts that you might be able to use, and friends.
And friends. All right. I like to end the podcast on a really practical note. And so the theme of that conference lends us in that direction. What are some of the things that you do to try to connect directly to your readers and build that rapport and, keep them coming back?
For me, it's my newsletter. So I'm a big fan I send it out weekly now, and I just tend to talk about what I'm up to, a lot of inspiration behind the book, ask people questions. And I have people who have been on my newsletter for 5 or 6 years who still respond, and we have these long conversations. There was a guy who used to email me when I was first started, when I published my first book, and I hadn't heard from him for a while, and I knew he was kind of older, so I reached out a few months ago. It's just like, hey, haven't heard from you. How are you doing? And he emailed right back and he was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you remember me. And I was like, you're one of my very first people who ever emailed me back. You're seared in my memory. So for me, it's the newsletter. I love those conversations.
That's lovely.
That's perfect. Did you tell us the website for the Author Alchemy Summit?
I probably did not, but it is authoralchemysummit.com.
Okay. And if people want to find out more about you and your works and follow you, where can they do that?
You can find me at jessiekwak.com, and that's JESSIEKWAK.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this conversation and for making time to be with us. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much.
I can figure out how to stop the recording.